Hello everybody, and let's clock back in. We're clocking in today with Drakengard 3, a full retrospective of what we just watched, or if you haven't watched it yet, this review and retrospective will contain a lot of spoilers, including all of the endings, as well as explanations of the weapons, the timelines, the characters, the development. If you are interested in seeing the gameplay, mechanics, before you get all the spoilers, feel free to go back and watch those videos before doing this one. But if you're all set, ready to go, and you know that spoilers are coming, hi, how are you? We're going to be talking quite a bit about the game. The origin, the development, the timeline, the history, who made it, why'd we make it, the music, Taro himself, his philosophies, Branch A, Branch B, Branch C, Branch D, the final song, how do we get ending E, weapon histories, character development, what's going on. We're going to dive right in. If you are familiar with the series, due to being a fan of maybe NieR Replicant or NieR Automata or NieR Reincarnation, and you want to know the origin stories, well, welcome to Drakengard 3. Drakengard 3, while being the third game released in publication order, is actually the prequel to all of the games. Takamasa Shiba was a stubborn man, and he was obsessed with the idea of Drakengard 3. After the release of Drakengard 2 and Drakengard 1, the producer never stopped trying to revive it and get Drakengard 3 to be made. He would reach out to Taro Yoko during the time they were working with Kaguya. Kaguya is the producer that originally produced Drakengard 1 and 2. Kaguya at that point had fallen apart and was now reaching out to try to get Taro Yoko back on board. Taro Yoko was involved in the making of Drakengard 1, but did not take place in the development of Drakengard 2. Drakengard 2 is technically part of the Yokoverse, as it follows Branch A of Drakengard 1, but does not continue from the final branch of E, so it's not along the full timeline. It is just an alternative branch of the characters that are developed. So it is part of the Yokoverse, but it is not part of the NieR history timeline. Once Kaguya broke up, they tried to turn to other studios, including AQ Interactive, Enix, and Square, and this was before Square and Enix merged to become Square Enix. After Kaguya had fully fallen apart, Takamasa Shiba was really trying to reach out to AQ Interactive, but they decided they were not available to create this game, and they were too busy with its other browser games and merger. They did not believe that their market would be receptive to such a violent video game. It was not necessarily wrong. Console games revenues in Japan had been plummeting for several years. The previously fanatical audience was diminishing, and the Japanese role-playing industry was the first victim. NieR had just suffered a bitter failure after all. NieR had already been written before the writing of Drakengard 3. NieR was Taro's version of Drakengard 3, and he originally wanted to call it Drakengard 4 in hopes that the audience would be lost trying to find the missing game of Drakengard 3 and make them go on a search for the missing piece of the series, but that was nixed, and he ended up just calling the game NieR, and they wrote Drakengard 3, which ended up being a prequel to the whole entire installation. A lot of the original scripts and first drafts considered too eccentric were rejected. In another, the player was following the adventures of a Japanese high school girl who was able to summon a dragon using her phone. But this was not the strange and offbeat fragrance that Square Enix and Shiba were looking for. They wanted to get a whiff of the past recipes, well-loved favorites, and thus forced Yoko to keep within the thematic framework of the first Drakengard. Through perseverance, and probably because Taro Yoko was unemployed at the time and not had received a better offer, Shiba did manage to secure the director's participation in Drakengard 3, and could therefore finally get to the heart of the matter. The producer had to deliver the following gamble, which meant proving that otaku games deserved to be given a place on consoles after they had fallen off and people did not want to be playing such violent stock video games anymore. Through Square Enix, Shiba distributed questionnaires addressed to players, the results in which would assure him that what fans preferred in Drakengard was the tormented universe. Subsequently, and thanks to part to the internet, the pre-production reflection phase was completed and the specifications were drawn up. First and last element written on the document reproduce Drakengard a better version if possible. Some kind of joke? Not really. Drakengard 3's creation was set in an asphyxiating commercial breeding ground, entirely subject to Shiba's mercantile certainties. However, surprisingly, his self-confidence contrasted with the attitude of his employer, Square Enix. Several elements did indeed suggest that the publisher had intended from the outset to provide minimum assistance for this game and did not fully share the enthusiasm of its producer. Yoko at the time simply answered that Drakengard's sales pitch was the business of sequels, and the comment was clearly not bitter since the director regularly expressed his gratefulness for being allowed to work. Yoko said that the Drakengard fans frequently requested a dark story according to the surveys from Square Enix and Shiba. Personally wanted a story like NieR. Yoko aims to do neither, while keeping true to the spirit of the Drakengard series. He also mentioned within the same interview a couple of ideas he wanted to do for his entry were rejected. Logically, a similar creative process was used, inspired by otaku references from Japanese animation. Thus, the casting, mostly female, contrasted sharply with the violent action video game models calibrated on the murderous imaginings of rough men. And this follows a very important interview that Taro did about what is killing. Yoko often talks about how his view of video games involve killing, or at least that encourage being better than others, has changed over the years. He talks about how originally he thought someone celebrating killing hundreds of people would have been insane to enjoy that, thus why he made the first game and cast of insane characters. When we were exploring the original Drakengard, I thought about the meaning of killing. I was looking at a lot of games back then and I saw these messages like, "You've defeated 100 enemies," or "eradicated 100 enemy soldiers," in an almost gloating manner. But when I thought about it in an extremely calm state of mind, it hit me that the gloating about killing 100 people is strange. I mean, you're a serial killer if you kill 100 people. It struck me as insane. And that's why I decided to have the army of protagonists in Drakengard be one where everyone's insane. To create this twisted organization where everyone's wrong and unjust. And I wanted to weave a tale about these twisted people. Yoko isn't the kind of guy to write a story with a generic "I'm fighting the bad guys because they're bad guys" type story. We will have that for Drakengard 2, but the theme you think is not what it is that comes across in Drakengard 3. Zero isn't insane or psychopathic like Kame in Drakengard 1, nor is her conflict with her sisters a case of two sides of the same coin like NieR and Shadowlord. By all means, Zero's mission is selfless since she knows if she doesn't do anything, her sister's actions will result in the end of the world. And you wouldn't know it going story side. She was correct. In the beginning of Drakengard 3, it's unclear why Zero first became obsessed with her survival quest, or why such a charming young girl like her sisters deserved to die. So much that the game appeared to rely solely on the many excesses of gratuitous brutality it inherited from the previous episode, with an induction filled with murders and deranged laughter. But that was a weak, reasonable discourse. Yoko indeed quickly summoned Drakengard's ghost, and it seemed to repeat its message. There is no justification for murder than the madness of humans. Unless you were a serial killer or a sadist, Zero's bloody killing spree could only seem unfair and illegitimate. That was the trick, since this prejudice would later be reversed when the intoners would reveal themselves to be emanations of the flower's power whose existence threatened the world. Drakengard 3 elevated a murderous prostitute to the rank of world protectress and demigoddess, the unsuspected Esmeralda, thus articulating Drakengard's harsh and coarse cruelty as well as NieR's angle premonitions. Drakengard 3 produced the synthesis that allowed it to partly avoid repetition, in at least terms of themes. For the rest of it was called sticking to what you know best. The story was written to have a good balance of darkness and humor. According to Shiba, he said that there was actually a good bit of darkness in the game's dialogue, for example. The team did not want to turn it into a completely dark story, instead of still having scenes that people could laugh at. Yoko did not want the emotions of the various characters to fall into a simple stereotype, and there be simplistic take on the situation. Yoko has a habit of taking a character that is designed and making their personality to be the complete opposite of what you would think it to be, as he does not enjoy stereotypes and wants to always make you think outside of the box as well as himself. The dialogue between Zero and her disciples was written by Yoko to contrast the content of the violent combat going on around her and the characters at all times. Elements of fourth wall breaking were included in the game, such as some of Zero's dialogue or Accord's actions during the final ending. This has acted as a callback to Drakengard and to suggest that the real world was simply another branch of Drakengard universe all along. Drakengard 3 was announced in Japan in March 2013 through Japanese game magazine Famitsu. Drakengard 3 received a few game gameplay reviews, but was promoted in the form of novellas because Shiba wished for the game's story to remain a mystery for players. Later on, the game was complemented with multiple DLC packs for the sisters, including character outfits, cosmetic adornments for Mikhail's, and the prequel chapters. This DLC was later released in the West, along with alternative music for Zero's and Toner mode sequences. Drakengard 3 received, on average, mixed reviews, while the gameplay was sometimes criticized by reviewers, stating that the maps were boring, repetitive, recycled, and not much to look at. Others praised the maps for being a glow-up from the first game series. While the maps are indeed repetitive, they did lack the open world that comes with Replicant and Automata. They still have a lot more detail than the original Drakengard games did, where those maps were very bleak, very straightforward, and was a very repetitive cycled game. The game was often praised for its inclusion of very different types of combat. Zero the Intoner gets partnered with 4 different disciples that you can partner with, and you can have up to 2 in your party at any time. Zero also gets the option to play around with 4 different types of weapons, and so it increases the mechanics that were originally in the game by having a different choice of style and combat. Not only do you have the hack and slash run and gun type game, you have dragon sequence and flight sequences that were taken from Dragon Quest and Ace Combat. These mechanics have you flying on Michael or Mikhail and doing various flight mechanics and fighting on Dragonback. These mechanics were often not praised as highly as the rest, as the mechanics were a bit glitchy and the combat was a bit sensitive and a little hard to aim. As you can see in one of my gameplays, I did struggle with some of the flight combat. It is a game that was released in 2013, 2014, and was never really updated or refurbished, and so the mechanics remain to be a little bit laggy and there are frame drops. The overall hack and slash mechanics were a huge upgrade, and Zero's in Toner mode was often praised for the fun, the speed, and the damage that it did, and it was just an enjoyable aspect of the combat. But it combined so many different aspects, with the dialogue being done during the gameplay to contrast the gruesome war that you were fighting, and having comical events, the flash screens, the fourth wall breaking. It was all a very well done game. It just wasn't very highly published by Square Enix, and there wasn't a lot of promotional material for it, so it did not get released very widely. During its first week of sales in Japan, Drakengard sold 114,024 copies, and coming in 4th in the Japanese sales charts, it reached 125,500 units by the end of the year, for a total of that year that it was released. While it did receive physical and digital release in Japan and North America, Drakengard 3 was only released digitally in Europe, so that might have hindered some of the sales, but again, it wasn't published or produced very widely, and there was a very big lacking of promotional material. After release, there was a novella produced called Dragon Dragoon 3 Story Side. This novel was only released in Japanese and it is really hard to find, and there are very few, if any, English translations. I did try really hard to find some, but I only found some synopsises and timelines explaining what really happens in the novella. The story side is what Branch E is actually supposed to lead into NieR. Upon the release of the Blu-ray of Drakengard 3, there was a trail to discover the director's next activity, which falls into NieR. A song was hidden close to the data of the Android Accord, which is impossible to listen to during the game. It's titled Normandy. The intriguing song was performed by the mysterious band Yorha, and also credited for the boss tracks. One thing leading to another, it's easy to understand that Yorha was the name of the group of Japanese idols who performed the songs of Moanica. The group of composers founded by Kikichi Akabe, the main director and musician for writing the music behind the masterpiece of NieR and the Universe. One thing that is of the utmost importance within the RPG and NieR series is the use of music and soundtrack to elicit emotion and a feeling within each character, dialogue, and emotional story sequence. A lot of the music was credited and written by Kikichi Okabe, and they deserve so much credit for the amazing world and creations that they have done. From the early stages of mainstream Japanese RPGs during the NES gaming era, the composer's role was critical, and for one simple reason, limited by modest display capabilities, the first 8-bit consoles, developers could not rely solely on graphics to create an illusion of epic and spectacular adventures, which were at the very heart of the game. So the use of music and soundtrack was a very big importance of how you develop the storylines and to get the characters to feel the right tone for each genre and aspect of the adventure. Music played a key role in stimulating the player's imagination, amplifying emotional intensity. This was included in Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, including stories of Chrono Cross and the Secret of Mana. A myriad of iconic soundtracks would go on to indefinitely establish music as one of the main pillars of the genre of JRPGs. Melodies leave their mark on an audience. Role-playing games generally last a long time, and they can play out for 10 or 20 times longer than a movie, whereas a soundtrack may contain half as many tracks as a feature film. Immersed for tens of hours in the same musical atmosphere, the players are given plenty of time to integrate the motives, to assimilate the melodies, and to even hum the battle theme with each new looming skirmish. More than just music, some compositions have acquired the status of anthems in video game communities, such as the prelude or fanfare of Final Fantasy, or the theme of the character Frog from Chrono Trigger. Already eager consumers of anime soundtracks, the Japanese therefore gladly purchase albums of their favorite games directly available from stores throughout Island Nation. As a result, every year the original soundtracks of the biggest JRPGs become chart toppers in the Oricon weekly ratings. Kikichi Okabe was born in May 20th, 1969 in Kobe. From an early age, his parents enrolled him in electronic organ classes, and he was trained in a repertoire which included classical music, but also Western pop songs and movie soundtracks. At the University of Kobe is where he met Taro Yoko. They became friends and joined the ranks of Namco simultaneously at the end of their studies in the 1990s. Despite his CG training, Okabe assumed the sound designer position, and he earned his first stripes in the Tekken fighting game series. Collaborating with Nobuyushi Sano, a future composer for Drakengard, a few years later he left Namco to go freelance. He then founded Monica, his own musical production group, for which he recruited several former fellow composers of the Namco sound team. Okabe's compositions in following those Monican mainly distinguished themselves by their rock, pop, and jazz themes, whose main role consisted in setting the atmosphere for the levels of arenas of Namco's arcade games. When Taro Yoko called his old colleague friend to replace Nobuyushi Sano in NieR, Okabe had yet to experiment with role-playing games. A wide gap separated the worlds of Tekken and NieR. On one side, an intense, nervous fighting game, on the other, a role-playing game full of cutscenes and dialogues. In the case of Tekken, the player, tested by intensity of the duel, generally ignored the peripheral gameplay sounds. Thus, the composer's goal was to merge the music into an atmosphere that resonated with the subconscious, rather than trying to capture the player's attention at all. This is why Okabe usually highlighted the rhythms of his compositions to match the action. I would write tracks that would evoke a sense of competitive spirit. In the case of NieR, Okabe adopted the opposite approach and placed all emphasis on melodies. It's not about the player being driven to concentrate on his or her gameplay, especially in an RPG like NieR. In some instances, there are seeds in which the player's mind can shift to the story, graphics, and the music. Ranging from a quiescent sadness to an intense sadness, Okabe explained his music was designed to create the atmosphere to permeate the game and its world, rather than to simply accompany it. Hence, there were no battle or victory or dungeon or village themes here. Sudden shifts in tone, typical of transitions between areas in the Sugiyama structure, were carefully avoided. The entire spectrum of melancholy could be experienced here, declined in countless poignant melodies that confer to the game's consistency and its unique end-of-world atmosphere. It is worth noting that in order to make it seem like the music intermingled with the game, Okabe and his team used different instrumental layers. These shifts are noticeable during transitions between combat and exploration phase, but are at least more precise movements. By coloring the narrative and offering interpretation of the world through music is not dissimilar to the extremely graphic scores that one of Okabe's main influences used. A request came from Taro Yoko during NieR's development to pressure Okabe into recording lyrics for the music, but not just any lyrics. Yoko stipulated that the language must not be recognizable, and you could even give the player the impression that it was another world's dialect in order to match the dystopic feel of the game. So Taro developed a new lingo. The lingo was essentially supposed to sound as if it is Japanese, but kind of like Japanese gibberish, the best way to say it, Japanese Simlish, American Simlish. It is the tone of what you think Japanese would sound like, but it's not actually Japanese. He recruited a singer, an Anglo-Japanese singer who was fascinated by languages, to help write this and write a melancholic tone. Emmy Evans emigrated from the UK to Japan in the early 2000s, became the lead singer of this fanatical language. She is the singer on the NieR Automata, NieR Replicant, and Drakengard soundtracks, as well as a singer within the NieR Orchestra itself. When she was brought onto the project, a condition that she had was that she would be in charge of writing the imaginary lyrics that would accompany one of Monika's melodies. She speaks multiple languages, and her passion for linguistics led her to accept the project. The first song she wrote was the Song of the Ancients, performed in the game by Devla and Popola of NieR. For the lyrics of Evans combined English, Japanese, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and French elements. Emmy Evans was added to Drakengard 3, occasionally adding her voice and imaginary lyrics to evoke an atmosphere that was both sad and peaceful. As for the music evoking motion and movement, it's corresponded to many boss themes. Their rock and aggressive melodies, filled with distortion riffs, contrasted violently with the orchestral compositions of exploration music. Okabe was once again in charge of conducting these tracks. In Drakengard 3, the new lyrics written by scriptwriter Hana Kikuchi were recited by Zero, who lamented about the curse that dwelled within her. Sano's arrangement concluded that the C of this branch, it was Maya Usuda herself, Zero's voice actress, who sang the lyrics. The second reason that Yoko wanted to highlight the contrast in soundtrack lay within the character's representativeness. Drakengard 3 features 6 sisters with personalities at opposite ends of the spectrum. Moreover, all endowed with the power of song, which made singing a key feature of their way of expressing themselves. Therefore, also of their dissimilarities, Okabe adopted a two-step approach to reflect these abundant disparities. First, he encouraged several composers to color the melodies with their own sensitivity. Nobuyushu Sano and Keigo Hoshi have already been mentioned, but Kakuro Ishiyama and Kunikichi Takayashi from Monika should also be credited for their contributions to the exploration and combat themes. Kitataka Tohiyama, former music director of the Tekken franchise, was responsible for the themes of 3. To reflect the differences and diversity within the songs, Okabe next called on a handful of female singers, each with different vocal characteristics. Thus, their voices impregnated each style of composition with a particular emotion or personality. As mentioned, Emmy Evans depicted NieR's atmosphere with her tender and melancholic psalms. Nevertheless, she did not intervene much and mostly stood out for her performance of the final song, the final boss of Branch D. In a similar style, though more romantic, artist Air Aoi, known for the theme music of the Japanese Kill la Kill, sang Kurato, one of the 2 main themes of the game, and song ending for B. Every sister was meant to encompass a different theme, a different sound, and a different emotion. So different composers, singers, songwriters were all brought onto the project in order to get these songstresses to give you a different sense of the word madness, to give you a different sense of the word emotion, and to elicit something from you that made you question what the story was really going to be about. Taro was known for developing a very extremely deep universe for his plots, which means that his universe encompasses more than 10,000 years of history. So we are gonna dive into that. Now this is going to be a lot, and it's going to be a lot of background information, so bear with me. You can skip ahead to the other sections if you're more interested in the branches themselves, but if you want to know how the branches started, we're starting from the beginning. So let's remember how these games fit in with each other. Drakengard 1 was the first installment of the series to be released. Drakengard 2, the second installment of the series to be released. NieR was the third game in the series to be written, but Drakengard 3 was written afterwards and then produced before NieR. Drakengard 3 actually thematically takes place before Drakengard 1 and 2. 2 is not part of the full timeline, but it falls off of a branch of A from Drakengard 1. So, Drakengard 3's ending E, which was not produced in the game itself and only released as a story side novella, leads into Drakengard 1. Ending E of Drakengard 1, which was also not included in the game. Ending E of Drakengard 1 is what turns and leads into NieR. The later's ending E of NieR once again was missing from the title, and published in the Book of Grimoire NieR, which followed ending D, eventually led to the events of Automata. Ending E is thematically the correct choice and the right storyline to constantly follow within these timelines. I will have a timeline on screen and we will go through it, and it'll be very much confusing, and I promise you we'll get through it together. So let's start from the beginning. The beginning of the story starts with the Cataclysm. In Eastern Europe, the Eastern Roman Empire prospered under the Amerindian dynasty. In the West, the Carolingian Empire had just been divided between Charlemagne's 3 grandsons. In Asia, inspired by Chinese administration, Japan had adopted the Code regime, and while in the Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa, the Arab civilization had conquered large territories and settled as far as the gates of Aquitaine. This was in the year 856. All year round, devastating earthquakes ravaged Tunisia, Iran, Kyoto, and Japan, in the Corinth and the Byzantine Empire. Hundreds of thousands perished, and the Iberian Peninsula was also struck by a violent 7.0 magnitude earthquake of such immense intensity that it became known as the Cataclysm. Following this event, a huge city with a cathedral at its center emerged on the peninsula, the Cathedral City. In the space of a few years, hordes of dragons fleeing the city had burnt empires and nations to the ground. The Byzantine Empire and the 3 kingdoms of France fell one after the other, while riots broke out all over Europe. The continent was devastated and the borders destroyed. Hordes of refugees fled in the hope of finding a peaceful way to live. What remained in the region as the old empires henceforth was commonly called Midgard. While death engulfed the world, the rumor of the cathedral city's appearance became increasingly persistent, and many considered it as a last refuge for humanity. The former European elite, henceforth stateless, decided to transform the city into a sanctuary so that nobles and intellectuals could study the calamity that had struck the continent and unravel the secrets of the strange phenomena occurring all over the world. Refugees tried to enter the city walls, but they were not allowed in, as the European elite would respond and not let them go through the gate they made, called the Chaldea Gate. They controlled incoming flows, managed resources and food, and would not give to the poor and refugees, and the refugees eventually rose up in revolt and created what was known as the 10 Days of Tragedy, a bloody week. After the cathedral city withdrew into complete isolationism, many Midgard residents began to master some strange powers that were considered miracles, such as the power of destruction or the ability to detect water in veins in the ground. Upon researching the phenomenon, the Pythagoras Institute proclaimed the existence of magic. The users of these miraculous powers quickly acquired a high social status, which gradually enabled them to become leading figures within the city. They brought the order and social harmony as old faiths and religions deteriorated. The user's dominance was perceived as a new way of inspiring people and controlling the masses. The new faith devoted to them developed and spread swiftly. The Pythagorean Institute Church, more commonly known as the Church. For the first time in 10 years, Cathedral City reopened the gate and undertook its first territory expansion. Meanwhile, the Church pursued research into magic and experimented with techniques known as seal magic and tried to contain it, should a user ever lose control of it, and the situation got out of control during one of those experiments. The caster's foot unfortunately became gigantic and crushed 2,000 people living in the slums with its massive weight. 2/3 of the city were destroyed, and the church concealed the event. Despite the horrific outcome, the city continued to expand and sought to extend its influence into the surrounding regions. In this context, the church created the church investigation community, an armed force with powerful magical equipment, whose sole mission was to take control of various self-governing regions surrounding Cathedral City. Once this goal was achieved, the committee members, who scattered throughout Midgard, although still affiliated with the church, independently ruled over their own respective dominions, and they became known as the Lords of the Lands. There was the lands of the seas, the lands of the mountains, the lands of the forests, the lands of the sands. It was customary in Europe to have a territorial division, and the church, while its background nonetheless attempted to preserve the hegemony and the stranghold region by establishing close relationships with the lords, it did not go so well. More importantly, members of the church took advantage of these new local footholds to pursue their research on magic, and the church established magic academies dedicated to the study in every land. Thanks to the fantastic progress achieved within these institutions, magic was no longer a privilege of an elite and became a very common technique. In 1960, over a century after the Cataclysm, the first Magic Academy president was elected by the Lords of the Lands. His unusual profile, totally ignorant of mysteries of magic, caused a disagreement between the lords and the church, but more importantly, provoked anxiety and unease among magicians. There was years of dissatisfaction within the lords, and within one single night during the White Rebellion, they were all suppressed. In 1985, a widespread famine struck the entire continent. To survive, the church dignitaries and influential politicians abused their privilege. In exchange for money, goods, and weapons, even women and children, the lords provided them with food, to the detriment of people. Outraged by the level of corruption within them, a few magicians formed a secret organization to spark a revolution, the Blue Corps. 4 years later, when a famine had weakened the church's military capabilities, the revolutionary magicians began to set things in motion. They received support from many of their young colleagues, and in 1991, an uprising of the unprecedented scale broke out in the cathedral city, the Blue Rebellion. Its magicians occupied Central Magic Academy in the hope of overthrowing the church and the Institute's government. Despite all efforts, the Blue Corps was completely decimated overnight by the seal magic that encompassed the entire city. More than 3/4 of the civilians located within a radius of 2 districts were killed while surviving the catalyst for an execution of the spell. Among the survivors, many appear to have completely lost their minds and deemed potentially dangerous. The church buried them alive. After the rebellion, the church put in an effort to avoid repeating such a disaster and to ease fears, granted independency to the magic academies. Cutting itself from magical military power, it increasingly became dependent on the strike force of the lords of the lands, thus raising the question of its future hegemony over Midgard. Despite getting its newfound independence, the academy declined to a shortage of magicians to the point of totally losing support of the lords, still affiliated with the church. In order to regain its power, the academy lifted the ban on a multitude of extremely dangerous magical arts. The aftermath of this violation, Midgard sank into chaos. In 1995, a massive incident marked the end of the cathedral city such as it has existed since the Cataclysm. It is believed that a magician from the Central Magic Academy, in her attempt to summon the forbidden art of song, had made a singing error which caused a terrible explosion. In an instant, the city had been reduced to ruins and all traces of life disappeared. The dust produced by the blast of the explosion had formed a gigantic flower in the night, overlooking the Iberian Peninsula. 2 years later, one of Midgard's jail's 6 young women were held prisoner. 5 of them were severely tortured for having conspired against the Lord, regarded as a tyrant by people. The 6th was a former teenage prostitute suffering from plague. Her name was Rose, like the color of her eyes. Her life was fraught with blood and death. She had been found guilty of theft and more than 100 murders, starting with those of the entire staff in the brothel where she had been forced to work. The bodies of the rebels, wounded by the abuse of their torturers, lay before Rose's eyes, their eyes gouged out, their flesh burnt, their bones shattered, and their nails ripped from their fingers. Lying there in agony were 5 brave souls driven to will to face the established order. At that moment, the contrast between dignity of these resistance fighters and the pure malevolence she embodied could not be more prominent. Drenched by the rain that seeped into the cell with blood trickling down her body, the murderers cursed the universe for lashing out at decent people for taking it upon themselves to protect the weak and defenseless, but also for transforming her into what she had become, an empty stomach whose only resort was to steal food from the pot-bellied people along with their lives. Fuck the world. Fuck you all. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fucking die. She raged inwardly. But the world was hardly offended, and she watched her tormented comrades draw their final breath one after the other, until she found herself alone, dying, her trachea clogged with blood accumulating in her lungs. Her time was coming. Before drawing her last breath, her gaze fell upon a beautiful pale pink flower. She had never seen one so beautiful. Her field of vision became obstructed as the petals grew larger until the flower had taken full possession of her body. Rose was dead, and Zero was born. Miraculously resurrected, thus cured, Zero awoke with her new powers, a white flower with pink pistils in the place of her right eye. She henceforth could use the magic of the forbidden art of song. In the ancient texts of the cathedral city, the beings who mastered this ability were of immeasurable power called intoners. Zero had also acquired an incomparable healing skills. However, she realized her body no longer completely responded to her. Her brain, her heart, her muscles, nothing seemed to obey her. Reduced to the role of an articulated puppet, rather than an undead given the circumstances, Zero concluded that it was the magic of the flower she had seen before dying that now controlled her actions. Within that time, sensing the danger that the flower embodied, she was determined to die for good. Zero attempted to take her own life. She stabbed herself in the heart, but it did not die. She also attempted to rip the flower from her eye, and in her torrent of screams and blood splattering the ground, spilled 5 little girls bathed in the liquid. They fled before she could even register that they were there. Therefore 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 were intoners, born of her own sense and of her self. They were just extensions of her, taking part of her magic with her and running away to different parts of the land. Zero recognized that she needed to kill her sisters in order to get back the pieces of her magic and reunite every part of the flower. Once the flower was reunited, she was intending to kill it, to kill herself, to get rid of the danger that is there to be. Upon learning that Zero could not kill herself with the flower in her eye, that it only reproduced and created her sisters, or corpses of herself, as Zero herself was just a corpse as well, the flower had taken host to now 6 people. The only way that the flower could be properly destroyed was with the power of a dragon. At that time, Zero recruited Michael. She met Michael on the battlefield, the strongest of all the dragons, and had to fight with him in order to get him to join her cause. Once she proved herself worthy, Michael decided to join up and help her to eradicate the intoners, knowing that his final quest in the end was going to be to kill Zero, as she wished to end the flower's existence. In her first attempt, in the prelude, or the beginning of the game, you play as Zero and are assisted by Michael as you go to kill your sisters in the cathedral city. You are unfortunately blocked by all 5 sisters being there and Gabrielle wounding and killing Michael, and Zero being blown off the edge as her arm is ripped off by the dragon. Michael was unable to recover from his wounds, and his dying wish, as a dragon gets a final wish, was to be reincarnated to assist Zero in her quest. As Zero's arm was bitten by a dragon, she was unable to regenerate her arm. Although her flower gives her incredible healing and regenerative powers, her powers stop where a dragon begins, so she was never able to fix that one arm. After the prelude and the sequence, you start Branch A, where Zero is assisted by Mikhail, the reincarnation of Michael. And Mikhail is a bit of a whiny, stinky baby. And that's where we get started with the game, and what is the entirety and craziness and the eccentricity of Branch A. So let's dive into the timeline of Branch A. Branch A is the most straightforward of all the branches. Branch A starts off after Zero is recovering a year later from her wounds from Gabriella, as her arm is removed and ripped off by the dragon. She has spent the time with Mikhail, the reincarnation of Michael, and she starts off in the land of the seas, getting ready to find her sister 5. At this time, you are leaving Zero's house and hiding place, and you are getting to know Mikhail and why he is the new dragon that she has. She explores the lands of the seas and meets some enemies along the way while going up against her sister's 5. Once she gets over to the place where her sister 5 is hiding out, she goes into a battle with their demon and the disciple Dido. 5 is a tall woman with a lusty appetite who loves to overindulge in every way imaginable and leans on her disciple Dido too much to satisfy her, something he absolutely resents, and she makes her home in the lands of the seas. The fight there is pretty straightforward as you're flying on Mikhail's back and attacking the monster that is in the depths of the Colosseum. Once you complete that fight, you then take on 5 in a cutscene and stab her. You are unable to successfully kill her, and Dido comes through clutch and kills her right in front of you and laughs maniacally as he does it, as he then joins your party and tells you how much he hates and absolutely resents working for 5, and that she drives him nuts, calls her some pretty nasty things while getting bleeped out by the game's censoring systems. The game has a way of tying in a lot of very traumatic, intense themes while also adding humor into it and making it seem funny by adding in censorship marks, bleeping, and screens so that you can't watch it. It is designed by the game to make you laugh while playing, but also to kind of make you question why all this killing is going on. Branch A takes the longest of all the branches, as you take an entire chapter to go through each sister. You then move on from Sister 5 to go on to Sister 4, where she is hiding out in the land of the mountains. You have to go through the snowy mountains, and then you go to the actual mountains and find her flying in the sky on an airship, and you have to do some air battle with Dido by your side and Mikhail to help you along the way. Once you are able to tackle and take down Sister 4 on her airship through some trickery that Zero uses on 4 to get close and kill her, this is the first time you start to see changes within Mikhail, and he starts to evolve behind the scenes as the power of the flower is being absorbed by him. After tackling Sister 4, you move on to Sister 3. She is the most popular with her soldiers, but she experiments on them in order to create many monsters within the game. She has a very big passion for her work, and she never kind of stops talking about it, which leads to Octa's early on surrender and joining of Zero's party. So Zero at this point has taken 3 of her sister's disciples, Decadus, Dido, and Octa. She follows through and goes through to kill 3. I'm not going to go super into detail on all of these branches, as you can watch the cutscene compilation or the full gameplays that I have available on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe and check those out. Once you get to meet 3, you end up in a fight with her and her monsters that she's created, and this is the first time you see Mikhail get really overtaken by the power of the flower as he eats Sister 3 and evolves into a new form. Before you can even question everything, Mikhail is taken away by Scent, the disciple of Sister 2, which is where we're headed next, to the land of the seas, to the land of the sands. 2 and Scent are a very much in love couple. 2 is a charitable and cheerful woman. She does eventually go crazy after a group of orphans that she has adopted were brutally murdered, and she becomes overtaken by the power of her song and completely loses herself, sense, and worth, and goes into a deep-seated madness. After rescuing Mikhail, you move down further into the land of the sands and take on 2 and fight her and find out that she has been taken over by her song, and Zero asks to end her misery, but Scent decides to fight back anyway. Once defeating 2's monster, you then kill 2, and Mikhail evolves once again into his additional and final form. He takes on this form before you fly off to the cathedral city to take on 1. You go into a long-winded battle with Gabriel, 1's demon dragon, and eventually climb your way up the cathedral city to the top of the cathedral to fight one-on-one with 1. After returning the disciples to their original forms, doves. Now, where did these forms of doves come from? Each of the sisters met these disciples while wandering and took them under their wing. These men were meant to act as protectors of their respective intoners, but as the lovers expected to satisfy the uncommonly intense sexual urges of mistresses. Nonetheless, they were hardly ordinary, as they were not naturally human. These were guardians, in reality reincarnations, used by Zero to calm her sister's trance during the fights during the Mercurius Gate. Since they had drawn their energy from their intoners, they were endowed with the abilities granted by the flower, which gave them the ability to summon the demons. These doves were created by Zero to calm the sisters down, to be by the sisters' sides, and it helped Zero to find the sisters and take them back, and that's why she was able to return them to their original form. Once you get to the top of the cathedral, Mikhail and Zero take on Gabriel and 1. Mikhail is able to stall the fight as long as possible, but ends up dying and using his final wish not to reincarnate, but to hope that Gabriel dies. Zero is torn by this and goes into a rage and kills Gabriel and 1. Upon killing 1, she gets into a traumatic state and goes over to Mikhail, begging to find a new dragon to kill her to end the power of the flower. At the same time, she's stabbed in the back by 1, whom she thought she had just killed. But when she turns around, it is that 1, her sister, had actually created her very own split of the flower and created her brother. Her brother begged her not to hate her, but Zero said she never intended to live, and 1 became distraught and went off to survive on his own and create a whole new branch and world. This is the first time we see a chord pop in at the end of the game, and she mentions that this branch is a failure and hopes to find a branch that was going to succeed. Then you load in to Branch B. Branch B is a lot shorter than Branch A and follows you killing the sisters once again, but is no longer in chronological order, and for some reason you have all the disciples by your side, and yet Scent forgets his own disciple and doesn't remember being madly in love with 2. You go through this journey in the land of the forests and end up finding that some of the sisters have killed each other, and that 2 is the end boss fight, and Sent joins sides with 2 and turns on you. You have to fight 2 and Sent at the same time, while the disciples turn and fight each other and end up killing each other in the mess, and you end up killing 2. The demon that 2 and Sent summon as they die is a demon of spider-like origin and is very poisonous. While you're on Mikhail's back, you end up taking a lot of poison damage, and once you defeat the spider demon, Mikhail succumbs to the poison and dies before he can make his last wish. Zero once again is distraught by sadness and remembers the power of the flower and uses her power to make a pact with Mikhail's body and chooses to save his life over her own. Mikhail wakes from his sleep looking for Zero, but hears a childlike voice in his head and responds to it as if it is Zero. Zero gave up her life for the dragon, which means that the flower was not destroyed, and Branch B was once again deemed a failure. Then you move on to Branch C, where it starts to get a little bit mad. The speech between the characters on the side is jumbled. Everyone is falling into madness. Things are out of order. 2 gets killed by all disciples. Sent kills himself. Michael is unevolved by the Gabriel and becomes once again a baby and loses his powers. 1 and Gabriel go into a fight with Zero, and during that fight, 1 releases a monster that ends up splitting Mikhail in half and blowing him to his demise. Zero ends up losing her sanity and is seen walking away vomiting and saying that she's going to find another dragon to help end the flower, and she is distraught with sadness at Mikhail's death, hoping that it would be her and not her dragon. And in the end of that branch, she ends up never finding another dragon, so Branch C is once again deemed a failure, and the flower continues to grow. Branch D is the final branch within the game. Once again, everything is completely out of order. The sisters that you run into are completely consumed by madness. The dialogue of the soldiers you run into are completely consumed by madness. Zero is consumed by madness, and the hunger to kill the flower grows stronger and stronger. You progress as you kill the sisters one by one again, and you make it to the end as the disciples end up summoning demons without the powers of their intoners and returning to their dove forms, all on their own, while simultaneously killing off their very own intoners. You reach the final fight against 1 within the cathedral city. Before reaching that fight, you go into the past with Zero explaining where her flower came from and that it was her corpse, and that she was the reason the intoners were born, as she tried to rip the flower out of her eye, and the flower deemed to protect itself by creating separate entities. Once you reach the cathedral city for 1, you go into a one-on-one battle and Mikhail ends Gabriella and you end 1 without losing Mikhail or yourself. Zero mentions to Mikhail that this is the final time and that he has to prepare for the worst. She reunites the flower's power and becomes a giant statue flower over the sky that ends up in a rhythmic game that Mikhail has to deflect all parts of the song to destroy the flower and destroy Zero. A chord steps in at the very end of the game, mentioning that she thinks that Zero's still alive somewhere and that this is definitely not the end and there will be more to see, and ends with a bit of a fourth wall breaking. But what does that actually mean? So that leads into Branch E, which again is only released within the short story novella of Drakengard Dragoon 3 that is published in Japanese, and I could not find many English translations. It follows a lot of the same branch guidelines as Branch A. She heals from her wounds and starts with her little baby dragon and goes off to defeat her younger sisters. She kills 5 and 4. Disciples turn into doves. All the intoner sisters die. Gabriel is defeated by Mikhail, and Mikhail is poisoned, however. Zero forms a pact between herself and the dying Mikhail to save his life. One's brother kills Zero, also killing Mikhail as per laws of the pact. The cult of the Watchers is formed, plague ends up spreading, and the world transforms into one inhabited by even fiercer monsters, and the cult of the Watchers oppose them. The seal system's been completed, though information regarding its details kept in secrecy by the priests. The first goddess of the seals chosen by the mark, and the second goddess of the seals chosen by the mark, a woman close to One, the leader of the cult Watchers. One tells the events of Zero's journey to the second goddess of the seal. Conflict arises within the Watchers, and it all begins with jealousy and despair of the woman who chosen to be the second goddess of the seal. The first case of red eye disease manifested within someone related to the cult, though they fell to their death immediately afterward, is spotted. All of this leading to invasions and wars between the different lands and the development of the Red Eye disease. The Red Eye disease is what takes over and leads into the events of Drakengard. One thing that Taro Yoko really likes to include in his games is the deep-seated emotions that follow not just why are we murdering, what's the point of murder, and the downfall of what murder can be. As you collect a weapon and level it up, you continuously unlock more of the weapon history. All weapon histories can be seen within the game, for example with 3's scissors. Level 1 states, "My name is 3. I'm the 4th eldest of the intoners. In what order was I made?" Level 2. "You're such an adorable little doll. Here, let me just patch you up with some of my expert stitching, Level 3. "Oh, did you lose a limb? Or 2? Don't worry, little doll. I'll fix you up as good as new. I'll fix you up as many times as it takes." Level 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Another little doll to add to my menagerie. 5 sword spear. Is there anything in this world that is boring? I have 5 older sisters, and I want them all. Level 2. I want Zero's everything, because her strength is truly gorgeous. I want 1's intelligence, because it would be better if I had it. Level 3. I want that radiant smile from 2, because it's a little more different than mine. I want that skillful dexterity from 3, because I have no idea what it is. Level 4. What shall I take from 4? Perhaps to be her first? Ha! That's right, I'm dying to have fun with this life. 4's claws. My name is 1. 4's claws. Level 1. My sister 1 named me 4. My name is neither 0 nor 1. Level 2. I'm neither the first nor the second, nor am I the last. Level 3. I should be superior. I should be winning. More than my younger sister. All of them, all of them, all of them! Level 4. Before going to bed, I will retrieve the part that makes me, me, and then I shall sleep in my cold bed. The masochistic joy from Decadus's main weapon. Level 1. Stop. Oh, please stop. If you put me in that boiling water, I'll be burned from head to toe. How can anyone be so cruel? How can... Level 2. Oh, why? Why do you beat me with that thick iron pole? All I can do is sob like an abandoned puppy ripped from his mother's treat. Level 3. No, that's far too large. I'm going to be split in 2. I'll be broken heart and soul. Just imagining it makes me want to. Level 4. Oh no, I'm afraid even I can't do that. Twisted hunger. Dito's main weapon. I detest ugly things. I hate the putrid breath of monsters, and I hate people corrupted by desire. How can they even stand to live like that? Morals. Morals make me puke. Trotting out the truth and justice, love for your fellow man. Pfft, what a crock of shit. How can people live in such a disgusting place like this? Level 3. Life is ugly, and people are nothing but fools. Why did the world have to end up this way? Level 4. The rotten fruit tastes the most sweet. A rotten body is beauty personified. Why does everyone fail to notice these things? 2's sword. I thought being a pair would allow us to survive. I mean, it was just like my name, you know? We were 2 then, and we would remain 2 forever. When we held hands... Level 2. When we held hands, we connected. I believed we truly had nothing to fear. Level 3. Our time was meant to be forever. Forever and ever. We were destined to keep this small life of ours secure. Level 4. I heard the sound of something breaking deep within me. There's no going back. All I hear is the noise slipping slowly away into the onrushing dark. Zero's blade. Level 1. From the moment I was born, there was nothing. And that's how I wound up with the name Zero. Level 2. I tried and failed to find the value in my life. Even religion failed me, for I would have sooner fought and killed a god than pray to it. Level 3. I took the lives and felt nothing. I killed without regret. Right? Wrong? Sin? Redemption? I couldn't even work up the urge to care. Level 4. Like a child, I waited and hoped for the moment when this sad shell of a life would finally be over. Cries and whispers. Sen's main weapon. Level 1. Seriously? You don't even know how to use this sword? Now that's just pathetic. Couldn't even possibly be easier. Even little old me can spin this thing around. Level 2. A disciple at my level has to have more than just strength, you know. He has to be bewitching beauty to make even his enemies swoon. Look, it's working on you too. Level 3. Money really does make the world go around, doesn't it? I should know, given the vast fortune I command. Not that they let me use it. Lord knows why. Level 4. Is there anything more important in life than beauty, strength, and money? What a kidder you are. I mean, do I even need to ask? The everlasting ring. Octa's weapon. Level 1. A journey is an enjoyable thing, especially one to learn the secrets of a woman. That's ever so exciting, which you can see for yourself if you move your eyes just a bit lower. Level 2. Climbing those 2 mountains is so enjoyable, feeling the soft ground beneath you, stuffing yourself with the small fruits found at the peak. Ah, that I had more mouths. Level 3. It's wonderful to est in the mother forest, whether your nose follows the aroma of the underbrush or you dare to explore the dark cavern that lies below. Ah, what bliss! Level 4. Let us not forget about a hike to the spring. A generous drink of liquid overflowing from the deep within my beloved pond would be enough to harden up anyone's weaponry. Okay, Clocky. We have just listened to you drown on and on for 40 minutes plus about the backstory and the history and the branches of Drakengard 3. But I still have so many questions. Okay, I know. You do. So do I. But Taro didn't, when he originally wrote these games, he didn't fully intend for all of them to... Taro did not originally write these games with sequels and continuation in mind, so there are going to be some continuation errors and some things that never actually properly get explained or things that don't actually fully make sense. They weren't all supposed to fall into the same universe, but eventually he did end up connecting them, so there is going to always be missing pieces, a lot of speculation. Use your imagination, figure it out to the best of your abilities. But what can you explain? Here are some of the most common questions and things you may be really, really curious about that you didn't fully get the answers to. You can't find those novels online because neither can I. Here we go. Why is Brother 1? What is Brother 1? Why did Brother 1 come into fruition? Brother 1 was created by Sister 1. She made a copy of herself as a failsafe to kill Zero if she failed to kill Zero herself and needed to end the flower and the intoner line. Why? Somebody had to be there to kill Zero to make sure that Zero did follow through with the plan. She couldn't fully trust Zero to do it, and so 1 was kind of that failsafe. Where was he in branches B, C, D? Considering you never have that fight with 1 inside the top of the cathedral city, it is assumed that Brother 1 is still hiding out somewhere, and so he's still there. He just never made a full appearance. He shows up in Branch A and Branch E. But why? What is it? What about him? Why is he important? Because he is incredibly important. Considering all 6 sisters need to die, Brother 1 is really where the story drags on to continue to Drakengard 1. The canon ending of Drakengard 3 is in the story side, and it combines elements from all of the other elements, but Zero and Mikhail end up forming a pact, and then are killed by the cloned 1. Pacts do not become widespread in the future branches unless this happens. The male clone of 1 goes on to start the Cult of the Watchers. The Cult of the Watchers actually end up exiling Brother 1 in the future, and that is when they create seals and prevent him from destroying the world, which is what he ends up doing when he gets angry and frustrated that he was exiled. What is the Cult of the Watchers, and why is it important that he exists to survive after the intoners to create the Cult of the Watchers? As you saw in Branch A, he ends up wanting to create a religion to worship himself and worship his sister, and that's what he does with the Cult of the Watchers. They're also known as the Church of Angels. They're a mysterious group that worship entities and they're formed after the death of the intoners, again, to honor himself/his sister, and the Watcher, Gabriel. The symbol of the cult ends up being the three-eyed twins, meaning him, his sister as one. So 3 eyes, 2 twins, himself, merged together. The cult is what becomes responsible for the creation of the seals, the goddess systems that protect the worlds from seeds, anything that would bring destruction upon it. It was led by one until he was exiled, and then his children and their descendants would lead to the cult's high priestess and priestesses. Many years after the exile, it becomes the force behind the empire and the main cause for the wars that take place during the events of Drakengard. In Drakengard 1, the cult wishes for the destruction of the seals in order to release the seeds of resurrection upon the world. The cult itself is composed of mages with the abilities to draw upon the powers of dark arts. These followers of the cult become infected by the red eye disease, and that is what drives the effects of Drakengard 1. The red eye disease turns the followers into mindless drones, robbed of any and all free will and sanity. One reveals to be the source of the virus and is used to spread the infection among the people. The red eye disease is a condition that affects various characters in the Drakengard universe, including some of the main characters that you play as. It is characterized by having scarlet red eyes and causes them to have violent berserk behavior. And it can present itself as the mark of possession by the Watchers, and it is what continues the story. So the reason 1 is created is to rid the world of Zero if Sister 1 fails. And once he's the last one alive, because no one knows he exists except for Sister 1, who in all cases has perished, he goes on to mourn his sister as he is essentially one with her, part with her, so he's obsessed with her. He creates the religion, goes down the line, creates the cult of the Watchers, which leads into the red eye disease, which he's the cause to spread, and that leads into Drakengard 1. So he is important. He's just not mentioned very clearly, but there are novels and novellas that are specifically about him and what happens after the events of Drakengard 3 that explain that more thoroughly. Mikhail, what happens to Mikhail after Branch D? It was asked what happens to Branch E, but Branch E is explained earlier on in this video, but I'll explain it again. What happens in Branch D? If you saw on my channel, I also have Zero's Prologue DLC. At the end of the DLC, you unlock the Intoner Memoirs, and you start to read a journal from Mikhail. In that journal, it is stated that you start to unlock his memories and things that happen to him as he starts to live alone and age as a dragon. Dragons are essentially immortal, but they do age and can eventually die, in a sense. But we're just following his journal entries, and it shows that as a young dragon, he's still sort of speaking in a fun, fruitful way. As he ages, he gives off a more mature tone, and he starts to reminisce and relapse about when he was with Zero, and his final words are kind of stretched out to give the impression that he's slowly dying and that he misses Zero and that he's sad and he's kind of collapsing in on himself, and then he passes of old age in ending D. Ending E, he does not survive. So there is nothing for him, as that is the canonical ending. Zero makes a pact with him, and Brother 1 kills Zero and Mikhail at the same time, eliminating the dragon and the final intoner, and that is how the world ends, and Brother 1 goes off to form the cult of the Watchers. So Mikhail, only in the known reported branches, survives in Branch B and D. In both cases, he's not necessarily super happy, but he does live out his life. Why are the disciples birds? Where did that whole thing come from? The disciples were created by Zero to keep the intoner's powers and the flower at bay. Basically, intoners are very sexual, very powerful, very unsatisfiable, and so the disciples were created to satiate that need, to keep them calm, to keep their powers in check, to help them in battle, to be their partners. If Zero wanted her sisters dead, why did she make them friends? She didn't directly mean to make them friends, or apostles, or disciples, or whatever you want to call them. It's depicted that when she was attacking, her sisters ended up weakening her enough that the flower separated and created the disciples, and they scattered off to meet their respective intoner and form with them. Why are they doves? It is kind of assumed that because the intoners are such a destructive force and the flower is kind of a negative thing, that the doves are a symbol of peace, and it's the complete polar opposite of what you expected to come out. And so the flower created something to protect itself in a sense. So it's the dove of peace that is supposed to bring peace and calmness to the intoners that were created by the flower. What about Accord? She's so confusing. Where did she come from? Why is she there? Well, you're not going to get that answer. It's not really clear as to what her relationship is with the rest of the game. She is, in fact, an android, but it is unknown whether or not she has a connection to Yorha. And if you don't know what Yorha is, that is the android units in Automata. We're not there yet. Just don't get ahead of yourselves. But it is unclear whether or not she has a connection to it. It is just briefly noted that she's kind of essentially a puppet, where her goal is to observe the human race and see what happens. We don't exactly know why. There's no direct connection between her, Project Gestalt, which is NieR, or Devla or Popola, which is also NieR. It's just kind of stated that she's there and she's observing, recording. We don't know why, and it's never fully specified. And that's frustrating because we all want to know why, because she shows up later in the games of Automata. She comes back. Not directly, but she is brought back. So we don't know why, and maybe one day we will. But for now, we don't. Why is it that the young sisters seem to have superhuman qualities when Zero doesn't? They have memories and childhood past. Well, that's not true. It's a farce creation by the flower. The flower created these memories to make them think that they were real people, to manipulate and control them, but the girls don't actually have any memories. They did not have a childhood. They grew up at a ridiculously quick pace, and that everything that they think they know has actually been completely and utterly fabricated by the flower. They really are just corpses created from Zero's dead corpse of flower, and they're really just puppets. Dead body puppets with no real memories. In Branch B, why does Sister 2 kill her sister? She goes nuts, essentially. It's presumed that after her DLC, if you saw that, she loses her mind completely, goes on a rampage, and ends up just killing her sisters. And before she can finish killing them, Zero catches up to her and ends it all, but she just goes completely bonkers. In Branch B, the flower being transferred to Mikhail from Zero. Does that mean Zero's dead? Is Mikhail the flower? How does Mikhail kill? We don't know. It's assumed that, like with Gabriella and 1 forming a pact, Zero forms a pact with Mikhail using the power of the flower, and she forfeits her body in order to save Mikhail's life, and she ends up being reverted back to a child as collateral. It doesn't really explain why he gets the flower in his eye or why things are, but they end up becoming merged, and they are one, and that's just how they live. We don't know what happens at the end of that branch. Do they die? Do they live? We don't know. But that same style of idea does happen in Branch E, where they merge, but 1 successfully kills them, and that's how it becomes the canonical correct branch. At the end of Branch D, it says that the flower gets sealed away, but yet Zero might still be out there, and maybe we'll see each other again one day. It's meaning that their power has been diminished, but they're not quite dead, so it's possible that they could come back into the future. They could break out of that seal. They're not dead, so when she said she'll see them again, we don't know whether or not she will come back or not, but Accord is alluding to the possibility that the seal could be broken and things could resume. Will the flower come back? Who knows? Will Zero come back? Who knows? Will all the sisters come back? Who knows? but there's just a lot of speculation because there's a lot of interpretation up with these games. And again, these weren't meant to originally connect to each other. They ended up connecting in the end, but so that's why there's so many questions and so many things that leave you super confused. If you have any other questions for me, please leave them down in the description below. I really hope you enjoyed this video. To the best of my ability, I tried to cover everything I could without overlapping too much or making this too long. If you want more, if you want less, let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode, next video, but for now, Drakengard 3, full history in retrospective is complete. Thanks for playing. I'll see you in the next video. But for now, I'm clocking out. Bye-bye!